Hello there. So I'm back, and this is episode 35. And if you've been following along, I am reading On the Path, an anthology on the Noble Eightfold Path drawn from the Pāli Canon and written by Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu, an American Buddhist monk who is widely respected for his translations of Buddhist texts and his teachings on meditation and the Dhamma. And his works are deeply rooted in Theravāda Buddhism. And so, this is a tradition that I align with, or I should say that I just have more experience with. But all of the names, all of the labels in Buddhism, I just recently kind of started drawing more attention to the word Theravāda. I never really did that in the past. I never really talked about being Buddhist in the past, I found myself doing this now and kind of being more specific. But yeah, so that's his tradition, and Theravāda Buddhists are drawing their practices from the Pāli Canon, which is considered one of the oldest known text of the Buddhist teachings. And we are still in chapter 3 and on the first of 8 of the Eightfold Path, and so we're still looking at right view. So this is Sutta 88. Then the Blessed One, picking up a little bit of dust with the tip of his fingernail, said to the monks, "What do you think, monks? Which is greater, the little bit of dust I have picked up with the tip of my fingernail, or the great earth? The great earth is far greater, Lord. The little bit of dust the Blessed One has picked up with the tip of his fingernail is next to nothing. It doesn't even count. It's no comparison. It's not even a fraction, this little bit of dust the Blessed One has picked up with the tip of his fingernail, when compared with the great earth. In the same way, monks, few are the beings who, on passing away from the human realm, are reborn among human beings. Far more are the beings who, on passing away from the human realm, are reborn in hell, in the animal womb, in the domain of the hungry ghosts. In the same way, monks, few are the beings who, on passing away from the human realm, are reborn among devas. Far more are the beings who, on passing away from the human realm, are reborn in hell, in the animal womb, in the domain of the hungry ghosts. In the same way, monks, few are the beings who, on passing away from the Deva realm, are reborn among devas. Far more are the beings who, on passing away from the Deva realm, are reborn in hell, in the animal womb, in the domain of the hungry ghosts. In the same way, monks, few are the beings who, on passing away from the Deva realm, are reborn among human beings. Far more are the beings who, on passing away from the Deva realm, are reborn in hell, in the animal womb, in the domain of the hungry ghosts. Therefore, your duty is the contemplation. This is stress. This is the origination of stress. This is the cessation of stress. Your duty is the contemplation. This is the path of practice leading to the cessation of stress. And that comes from SN 56:102 through 113. Wow. As I've mentioned, I use a particular AI, Norbu, to assist me with this because as I've noted, I am not a well-read scholar in this. What I am is a really long-time practitioner of this. Largely meaning meditation, really regular meditation. And a particular kind of meditation, that we do. So I'm gonna go get Norbu's help with this a little bit, and I'll be back to do some commentary, making sure that I'm understanding it correctly. Okay, so I'm back, and yeah, I did remember correctly, yay! And I had a good little back and forth going on with Norbu. this is, as I've mentioned in the last couple of episodes, we really are getting into the cosmology of Buddhism now, which, if you're more of a secular Westerner, which I naturally am, I came up in a secular home. I grew up in the West. I definitely have a highly secular kind of, fabricated state going on. I've talked before about kind of what I do in relationship to the cosmology in Buddhism. And as I suspected, here he's talking about the enormity of the idea of what happens after we die, after this body, it breaks down. And everybody has, every religion has an idea, right, about what happens to us when this body breaks down and ends. And the Hindus have an idea, and the Jews have an idea, and the Christians have an idea, the Catholics have an idea, the Buddhists have an idea, atheists have an idea, right? So Buddha is talking about this idea of being born in a human womb, an animal womb, And then this idea of the hungry ghosts and the devas. Now, as a secular person, I ain't gonna lie, this is really hard pill for me to swallow. But to my mind, it's no different than what someone in Hinduism would experience when experiencing jhanic states. What Buddha talked about was that, yes, he had those jhanic state, he had, and you can have those, by the way, I've had a couple, one kind of happened spontaneously through addiction recovery, as I've talked about before. And I had a lot of other things going on, before I came into Buddhism. I was in therapy. I was in a 12-step program, actually a couple of them. So these are all of this has been kind of a part of my particular story. I promise I'm getting somewhere. I promise. So I have seen for myself, as Buddha said I would, and you will, this incredible equanimity, just this incredible, and an incredible sense of oneness, getting to experience it 100% experientially. And as I've also talked about in the past, when I was a young woman growing up in the 80s and not being punk rock and not the straight edge kind, I've definitely had my share of hallucinogens, acid and, LSD, I guess would be the technical term, and, mushrooms, ecstasy, some of this is manufactured, all of this. Really, to my view, as someone who's, experienced that and experienced, some pretty interesting things in meditation, you're not seeing the whole picture, is what Buddha is saying. And I think if one were to be really honest with oneself, if you were to sit long enough, really sit with the fire of your mind, just sit with it long enough. And, for me, lots of trauma there, again, see earlier episodes, when I did, a part of what I experienced was very, very unpleasant, only to be likened by maybe a hell realm. I don't even really like to talk about this, and I suppose it's probably why Buddha didn't talk about it either. First of all, people are just going to think I'm a crackpot. Maybe I am a crackpot, I don't know. But suffice to say that I look at these idea of the hell realms and the devas as something that I just can't imagine, just like the Buddha really couldn't imagine it either outside of what he experienced in meditation. And so he doesn't really focus on any of that, he doesn't really focus on the trappings of the story and the narrative because it falls outside of what our human conception of it, quote unquote, it is. I don't really know if that helps at all with this passage, but it certainly helped me because this passage really is getting to, the cosmology. He's saying, look, It's not a lot of human beings who are, when they're reborn, they transcend human ego, the human clinging to the I, me, mine. That's rare, Buddha's saying here, right? It's more likely, he says, that humans will be reborn in hell, in the animal womb, and the domain of the hungry ghosts. So that is really, woo. If I was to play a mental game with myself, which I easily could do, and because I have seen how dark humans are capable of being, like I've talked about this before, that I got exposed to the darkness of man really young, and there's lots of humans that are exposed to just how dark humans can be when they're really, really young. And so it becomes kind of imprinted in their mind, and it also becomes imprinted in their body. And humans are beginning to understand this. We're beginning to understand trauma and trauma-informed care. We're beginning to understand the somatic experience, how trauma can be locked in the body, can be trapped in there. Anyway, I don't want to go off the rails here, but this is really radical, but I find it to be more realistic than Hinduism, quite frankly. I appreciate the idea that it's all God. It's all God. And what if we're not experiencing profound love, then what we're experiencing is the absence of God. And that makes a lot of sense to me. That even now, when I feel triggered or when I'm struggling with anything, these kind of propensities and these patterns that I have, some of which are coming at me through, they're hereditary, they run in my family. Others are more conditioning, how, my childhood experiences. Just like that's how you're conditioned, right? We kind of, it's nature, it's nurture, it's our ancestors, and it's the culture, and, it's all of it. The physiological, the psychological, the sociological, the anthropological, all the things. But the danger with that, and what the Buddha warned was the danger with that, is that we cling because it feels so good. And it does, It does feel good. Where a lot of, I think, ancient wisdom traditions agree is that we can cultivate loving kindness. We can cultivate loving kindness. It doesn't mean that we're always going to be perfect. We're not. In fact, that's kind of the point that Buddha was making, is that, look, if we're here, then all of that is operating in us. And that's why it's really important that we cultivate loving kindness, because we were lucky enough to be born in a human form, right? Last week I was talking about, we were reading a section where, Buddha says, look, the most you can hope for, really, from what my practice is, is this idea of attaining, it's just an endless kind of, what you're chasing after is, if what the Buddha is proposing is true, then that's a dangerous game to play, to chase after the pure feeling of love and light, because the mind is very deceptive, and the mind can become attached. And again, I'm going way off the rails, but yeah, not even sure if that really addressed this sutta, but it did for me. So hopefully if anyone's listening, you got something out of it too. All right, I'm going to keep on going. Sutta 89. From an inconceivable beginning comes transmigration. A beginning point is not evident, though beings hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving are transmigrating and wandering on. What do you think, monks? Which is greater? The tears you have shed while transmigrating and wandering this long, long time, crying and weeping from being joined with what is displeasing, being separated from what is pleasing, or the water in the four great oceans? As we understand the Dhamma taught to us by the Blessed One, this is the greater. The tears we have shed while transmigrating and wandering this long, long time, crying and weeping from being joined with what is displeasing, being separated from what is pleasing, not the water in the four great oceans. Excellent, monks. Excellent. It is excellent that you thus understand the Dhamma taught by me. This is the greater. The tears you have shed while transmigrating and wandering this long, long time, crying and weeping from being joined with what is displeasing, being separated from what is pleasing, not the water in the four great oceans. Long have you repeatedly experienced the death of a mother, the tears you have shed over the death of a mother while transmigrating and wandering this long, long time, crying and weeping from being joined with what is displeasing, being separated from what is pleasing, are greater than the water in the four great oceans. Long have you repeatedly experienced the death of a father, the death of a brother, the death of a sister, the death of a son, the death of a daughter, loss with regard to relatives, loss with regard to wealth, loss with regard to disease, the tears you have shed over loss with regard to disease while transmigrating and wandering this long, long time, crying and weeping from being joined with what is displeasing, being separated from what is pleasing, are greater than the water in the four great oceans. Why is that? From an inconceivable beginning comes transmigration. A beginning point is not evident, though beings hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving are transmigrating and wandering on. Long have you thus experienced stress, experienced pain, experienced loss, swelling the cemeteries, enough to become disenchanted with all fabricated things, enough to become dispassionate, enough to be released. And that comes from SN 15:3. So again, the Buddha is still explaining this relationship that is a natural sort of cultivation when you see for yourself the truth in this. And he's saying it right here, right? We've been here before, and I realize I really do get this, that this is a really hard pill for Western Buddhists to swallow, even though the West is, a Judeo-Christian place, and so it's a place that comes from believing in God. But the world is becoming more secular, kind of a not really believing in maybe necessarily anything. At least that's what I've read, The Buddha wasn't really interested in any of that either, It's just kind of a different conversation, whether or not there's a God. But, this idea would absolutely not align with the Judeo-Christian view. That and again, I'm way outside of my realm of knowledge here about what Christians believe heaven is. But it's really clear here. And reincarnation is not what many think it is in Buddhism. There is no soul in Buddhism. There's no soul. There is no soul. There's no soul. There's no me, mine, I thing that transcends and continues on forever and ever and ever. And, I get why that is just not an attractive model for a lot of people. Rather, we, the I, me, my, is nothing more than phenomena arising. And the reason why that's a hard pill to swallow in Buddhism is because we're clinging to our sense of self. I think it's really sad. The embodiment coach that I trained under, was really slighting Buddhism the other day on his YouTube channel. And it made me sad, because I think that a lot of people Well, first of all, I really have yet to meet a Westerner that actually really knows what the Buddha said. The Pāli Canon is, foundational text. Everybody, it's all just been so watered down and kind of, speaking of transmutating or transmuting, what's the word he used here? Transmigrating. It's just, it's unrecognizable. But look, I've had a lot of experience with teachers and the practice as it pertains to these old teachings here that are wholly contingent upon practice. And practice in community, I love to go on retreats because, doing this work in a room full of people that are farting, burping, moving around, itching, you got somebody sitting on a cushion in front of you and they're farting, and you're trapped in a room with them for 9 hours meditating, well, you take a break, but you're, and this goes on, a lot of retreats, at least the one that I've been on that's the longest, is an 11-day one, but they're longer, and so the radical sense of cohabitation. In Buddhism, there's no soul, we are the fabricated state. And of course, that idea would be unbelievably reprehensible to the ego. And I get, I was listening to a discussion the other day, and I'm embarrassed that I can't think of his name, but he's a psychologist and he's also a Buddhist. And it was the first time in a while that I really appreciated the conversation, the ways that he talked about Buddhism, but he also explained how important it is to, consider Freud, because he's been informed by both Buddhists, identifies as a Buddhist, but he also, Freud has shaped his worldview as a psychologist. And I get that, as somebody who's also, studying psychology, I also get Freud, and I also get Carl Jung, who was advised in formulating the 12-step model, which doesn't have a great success rate, but works for a lot of people. We're just not all cut out of the same cloth. And I think, one of the things that I love about Buddhism is that it's a path, it's not like, he says it's the path. Well, everybody thinks that their path is the path. In a way, pluralism is kind of BS, because everybody deep down thinks that what they're doing is the way. I hope I'm wrong about that. I would love to believe that most people can hold two ideas in their head at the same time. In other words, I can be Buddhist and have a lot of confidence in the path that I've chosen without needing anybody else's experience to be different. Now, obviously, if, the danger of authoritarians, which is a psychological condition more than it is a politic, infringes on my ability to practice the Noble Eightfold Path, then it's a different issue, right? But this is a very different way of looking at reality. And, he mentioned this, and I would agree. He said that there needs to be this psychological component, and I totally get that too. As I've mentioned, I came into therapy and addiction recovery for bulimia at a very young age. I think I was maybe 21, 22, and I had just gotten out of the Army and had moved in with my father and my brother in Northern California, moving from the South where I was stationed. And so I was kind of exposed to quite a few things simultaneously: hypnosis, just trying to get well. I was basically just really trying to get better. I was not psychologically in a good place at all. And it was absolutely on my knees, found, a 12-step program that was for people that had, problems with food, kind of weird relationships with food, not loving, not helpful relationships with food, and did that for 22 years. Oh, my goodness. And it saved my life. From my view, my time in that program absolutely saved my life. Also been in therapy off and on. I don't stay in therapy, but, find it very useful. So I get all of those things. I get all of those things. Why did I find my way to Buddhism at the end of all of that? Just, it just made the most practical sense for me as someone who had seen the horrors that I had seen. And also to have seen the things that I had seen in both my hallucinogenic experience as well as my meditation experience. It just made the most practical, subjective sense to me because of what I'd experienced. That having those experiences and then reading, having teachers or reading, the teachings of Buddha, it was just like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense to me. And I don't know how I feel about the karma and the hungry ghosts and the devas and all that. I don't know. I know that I've tripped out, man, and seen all kinds of stuff that wasn't there. I get that. But it just makes sense. Anywho, I'm going to keep on reading. So yeah, we're out there, right? We're getting out there now. He's saying, hey, look, you've been reincarnating, if that's the word you want to use. You've been on the wheel, the dharmic wheel. You've been riding the Mara pony for who knows how long. Maybe forever. And again, this is where I'm not a scholar, so I actually don't remember precisely what the Buddha says, precisely, if he even spoke precisely about any of that, but this is well-worn terrain for us. And it's not so much that we don't feel. In fact, we feel intently. It's one of the reasons why you train in metta and you train in compassion. You train in compassion, the real kind, not the people-pleasing kind. But yeah, I know for me, when I experienced what the Buddha is describing here, I felt like I'd just been let out of prison. The prison of my mind. The prison of my mind. There's just it was a perception shift. It was a radical relational shift to the abject horrors that I had experienced. And through meditation and kind of all those other experiences I'd had, and just the things that I had seen, and growing up on a part of my childhood up on a self-proclaimed commune of very psychologically sick people, it just made more sense to me. Yeah. But anyway, I'm going to keep on going. So, Sutta 90. From an inconceivable beginning comes transmigration. A beginning point is not evident, though beings hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving are transmigrating and wandering on. When you see someone who has fallen on hard times, overwhelmed with hard times, you should conclude, we too have experienced just this sort of thing in the course of that long, long time. When you see someone who is happy and well provided in life, you should conclude, we too have experienced just this sort of thing in the course of that long, long time. And that's SN 15:11 through 12. So again, remembering that we're still on right view here, right? And so considering what's been presented by Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu so far, this goes on, this cycle. We could be born in a human womb, animal womb, a deva, right, a higher kind of nibbana womb, or we can be born in a hell realm womb. And again, if you want to kind of get into, which you could certainly do with Norbu, Norbu was describing, what the ghost, the hungry ghosts look like, these big empty bellies and tiny little mouths and spindly, kind of describing what these people look like. And again, have to presuppose that he's describing what he's seeing in meditation. And yes, you're right. If you meditate long enough and you, just like if you drop acid or you do mushrooms, yeah, there's a lot of our mind that we don't use, okay? We know this, right? We know this. So here in this sutta, he's saying, look, we've, in this long, long time of moving through the death and rebirth cycle, not reincarnation. Reincarnation presupposes a soul. There is no soul in Buddhism. We've kind of been doing this for a long, 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 long time. And it's comic and karmic. It's causal and effectual in Buddhism. So thus, laying out this premise, right, again, going back to earlier sections and reading the book, if you're reading the book and not whatever, then here he's saying, hey, at some point you've been the lowest of the low. You've experienced that. And at some point you've experienced the greatest that life has to offer in material goods and things and the stuff to get and have and clout and all the things, right? All the things that we call the good life, and that's, if that's a hard pill to swallow, then, and I think anybody who's listened to me knows how I feel about the idea of taking what we like and leaving the rest. I'm not a big fan of that saying that actually comes, I heard that for 22 years in the 12-step model, well, I'm just taking what I like and leaving the rest. I understand that as long as you're maintaining integrity, you're remaining you have integrity towards the actual practice. Oftentimes the things that we want to leave are the things that we need to look at the most. But the ego doesn't want us to change, right? So we decide to leave it, convincing ourselves, right, that that's just what I'm going to leave in the program, right? And I get it. One could say I did that with the 12 steps, right? I just couldn't stomach the Judeo-Christian underpinnings as a Buddhist. I couldn't stomach it anymore, to be perfectly honest. I just couldn't leave it. I'm not very good at taking what I like and leaving the rest. Some might call that a failing, I'm also sober, but it's hard to get it. It's hard to get at it. It's hard to get at addiction, right? A lot of people are really addicted to their phones. It's really hard to get at it, isn't it? It's insidious. In fact, that's kind of what the Buddha's point, So anyway, if it helps to just think about this more practically, I mean, what a great way to reframe, your jealousy or your greed, or, if you come from a Judeo-Christian framework, the 7 deadly sins, right? Coveting another man's or woman's property, spouse, whatever. Or maybe you're secular and you don't like any of that, right? Well, just think about it from a logical perspective. If you could choose the way to go through life, if you could imagine, hey, if the Buddhists are right, I'm probably going to get to experience all of this. That's a helpful way to look at it. Sutta 91. There is, monks, an intergalactic void, an unrestrained darkness, a pitch black darkness, where even the light of the sun and moon, so mighty, so powerful, doesn't reach. When this was said, one of the monks said to the Blessed One, "Wow, what a great darkness. What a really great darkness. Is there any darkness greater and more frightening than that?" There is, monk, a darkness greater and more frightening than that. And which darkness, Lord, is greater and more frightening than that? Any contemplatives or Brahmins who do not know, as it has come to be, that this is stress, who do not know, as it has come to be, that this is the origination of stress, this is the cessation of stress, this is the path of practice leading to the cessation of stress. They revel in fabrications leading to birth. They revel in fabrications leading to aging. They revel in fabrications leading to death. They revel in fabrications leading to sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. Reveling in fabrications leading to birth, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair, they fabricate fabrications leading to birth, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. Fabricating fabrications leading to birth, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair, they drop into the darkness of birth. They drop into the darkness of aging, the darkness of death, darkness of sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. They are not released from birth, aging, and death, sorrows, lamentations, pains, distress, and despairs. They are not released, I tell you, from suffering and stress. And this comes from SN 56:46. And so, just to make sure I can get through a goodly amount tonight, would love to get to chapter 4. I'm going to keep on reading, and then I'll kind of comment. So, Sutta 92. Monks, I have seen a hell named 6 spheres of contact. Whatever form one sees there with the eye is undesirable, never desirable, displeasing, never pleasing, disagreeable, never agreeable. Whatever sound one hears there with the ear, whatever aroma one smells there with the nose, whatever flavor one tastes there with the tongue, whatever tactile sensation one touches there with the body, whatever idea one cognizes there with the intellect is undesirable, never desirable, displeasing, never pleasing, disagreeable, never agreeable. And that's from SN 35:135. Okay, and I think all I'll really say here, because it's still kind of really in cosmology. And I remember when I first came into checking out Buddhism and was introduced to these ideas, and, as someone who was an atheist, or I would say maybe, I guess what I really was agnostic. I'm not even sure what that word means. Here's what I was, here's what I am, whatever, I'm still this thing, and nothing's changed. I'm still the same. Is that I don't know, and that I know that I don't know. That I've had things happen to me directly that I've experienced that I can't explain. And I'm also, I'm also a psychologist. I'm very skeptical. I'm very secular. So here I'll just leave you with this. The Buddha recommended employing a trick that a lot of people employ, other religions employ, and psychologists also employ. Because what we all have in common is that we kind of understand that in order for any of this to work for us long term, to kind of become really psychologically salient to us subjectively as individuals, we really have to have a little bit of urgency around it. We have to have a little bit of commitment to it. You know what I'm saying? The Buddha says, first of all, see for yourself, so you don't have to believe any of this. If it sounds like hogwash, great. Never really talked about God or whether you could or didn't. It was, from the Buddha's point of view, from old texts, he would call Buddhism universal in the sense that from a Buddhist point of view, you could be a Christian, you could be anything, as long as you understood the psychology of the mind. This kind of, do you see what I'm saying? This kind of Buddhist psychology. And he would also say, hey, well then what if I'm right? What if you just lived like this was true? I mean, fine. So play a thought experiment with yourself. What if this was true? And if this was actually really true and you meditated on this, right? You would live a very different life, wouldn't you? Like the Eightfold Path would make, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path would make a lot more sense, right? And the Four Noble Truths are an aspect, they're kind of the crux, the skeleton, the core of right view. Right view. We create this suffering because we cling. It's not that life is suffering. We create all of this suffering because we cling. Clinging and not clinging is not loving or withholding love. That's a very Western way of looking at it. I get how it's been so sullied. I mean, I get if you've come up. Somehow I dodged all of that by growing up and had the weird childhood that I had. I don't have any of that operating there, I realize this is a very different way of looking at things. But it makes a lot of sense to me and a lot of other people who practice it all over the world, So I'm gonna continue on here. Yeah. Sutta 93. Then the hell wardens, seizing, and then in brackets he has, an evildoer by the arms, present him to King Yama. And here comes the dialogue. This is a man, your majesty, with no respect for mother, no respect for father, no reverence for contemplatives, no reverence for Brahmins, no honor for the leaders of his clan. Let your majesty decree his punishment. Then King Yama interrogates and interpolates, ooh, nice word, and castigates the man regarding the first Deva messenger. My good man, didn't you see the first Deva messenger that has appeared among human beings? I didn't, Lord, he says. Then King Yama says, my good man, didn't you see among human beings a tender baby boy lying prone in its own urine and excrement? I did, Lord, he says. Then King Yama says, my good man, didn't a thought occur to you? Observant and mature, I too am subject to birth, have not gone beyond birth. I'd better do good with body, speech, and mind. I couldn't, Lord. I was heedless, Lord. Then King Yama says, my good man, through heedlessness you did not do what is good with body, speech, and mind. And of course, my good man, they will deal with you in accordance with your heedlessness. For that evil karma of yours was neither done by your mother, nor done by your father, nor done by your brother, nor done by your sister, nor done by your friends and companions, nor done by your kinsmen and relatives, nor done by the devas. That evil karma was done by you, yourself, and you yourself will experience its result. Then having interrogated and interpolated and castigated the man regarding the first Deva messenger, King Yama interrogates and interpolates and castigates him regarding the second. My good man, didn't you see the second Deva messenger that has appeared among human beings? I didn't, Lord, he says. Then King Yama says, my good man, didn't you see among human beings a woman or man, 80, 90, 100 years old, aged, roof rafter crooked, bent over, supported by a cane, palsied, miserable, broken toothed, gray-haired, scanty-haired, bald, wrinkled, with limbs all blotchy? I did, Lord, he says. Then King Yama says, my good man, didn't a thought occur to you, observant and mature? I too am subject to aging, have not gone beyond aging. I'd better do good with body, speech, and mind. I couldn't, Lord. I was heedless, Lord. Then King Yama interrogates and interpolates and castigates him regarding the third Deva messenger. My good man, didn't you see the third Deva messenger that has appeared among human beings? I didn't, Lord, he says. Then King Yama says, my good man, didn't you see among human beings a woman or man, diseased, in pain, severely ill, lying in his or her own urine and excrement, lifted up by others, laid down by others? I did, Lord, he says. Then King Yama says, my good man, didn't a thought occur to you, observant and mature, I too am subject to illness, have not gone beyond illness. I'd better do good with body, speech, and mind. I couldn't, Lord. I was heedless, Lord. Then King Yama interrogates and interpolates and castigates him regarding the fourth Deva messenger. My good man, didn't you see the fourth Deva messenger that has appeared among human beings? I didn't, Lord, he says. Then King Yama says, my good man, didn't you see among human beings, kings, catching a thief, a criminal, having him tortured in many ways, as above? I did, Lord, he says. Then King Yama says, my good man, didn't a thought occur to you, observant and mature? It seems that those who do evil actions are tortured in these many ways in the here and now. And how much more in the hereafter? I'd better do good with body, speech, and mind. I couldn't, Lord. I was heedless, Lord. Then King Yama interrogates and interpolates and castigates him regarding the fifth Deva messenger. My good man, didn't you see the fifth Deva messenger that has appeared among human beings? I didn't, Lord, he says. Then King Yama says, my good man, didn't you see among human beings a woman or a man, 2 days or 3 days dead, bloated, livid, oozing with lymph? I did, Lord, he says. Then King Yama says, "My good man, didn't the thought occur to you, observant and mature, I too am subject to death, have not gone beyond death. I'd better do good with body, speech, and mind. I couldn't, Lord. I was heedless, Lord." Then King Yama says, "My good man, through heedlessness, you did not do what is good with body, speech, and mind. And of course, my good man, they will deal with you in accordance with your heedlessness. For that evil karma of yours was neither done by your mother, nor done by your father, nor done by your brother, nor done by your sister, nor done by your friends and companions, nor done by your kinsmen and relatives, nor done by the devas. That evil karma was done by you yourself, and you yourself will experience its result." Then, having interrogated and interpolated and castigated the man regarding the fifth Deva messenger, King Yama falls silent. Then the hell wardens torture the evildoer with what's called a 5-fold imprisonment. They drive a red-hot iron stake through one hand. They drive a red-hot iron stake through the other hand. They drive a red-hot iron stake through one foot. They drive a red-hot iron stake through the other foot. They drive a red-hot iron stake through the middle of his chest. There he feels painful, racking, piercing feelings, yet he does not die as long as his evil karma is not exhausted. Then the hell wardens lay him down and slice him with axes. They hold him, feet up and head down, and slice him with adzes. Don't know what that is. They harness him to a chariot and drive him back and forth over ground that is burning, blazing, and glowing. They make him climb up and down a vast mountain of embers that is burning, blazing, and glowing. They hold him feet up and head down and plunge him into a red-hot copper cauldron that is burning, blazing, and glowing. Then the hell wardens throw him into the great hell. The flame that leaps from the eastern wall of the great hell strikes the western wall. The flame that leaps from the western wall strikes the eastern wall. The flame that leaps from the northern wall strikes the southern wall. The flame that leaps from the southern wall strikes the northern wall. The flame that leaps from the bottom strikes the top. The flame that leaps from the top strikes the bottom. There ultimately comes a time when, with the passing of a long stretch of time, the eastern gate of the great hell opens. He runs there, rushing quickly. As he runs there, rushing quickly, his outer skin burns, his inner skin burns, his flesh burns, his tendons burn, even his bones turn to smoke. When he finally gets there, the door slams shut. Similarly, and then in brackets it says, similarly with the western gate, the northern gate, and the southern gate. There ultimately comes a time when, with the passing of a long stretch of time, the eastern gate of the great hell opens. He runs there, rushing quickly. He gets out through the gate, but right next to the great hell is a vast excrement hell. He falls into that. Right next to the excrement hell is the vast hot ashes hell, the vast Simbali forest, the vast sword leaf forest, the vast lye water river. He falls into that. Then the hell wardens pull him out with a hook, and placing him on the ground, say to him, "Well, my good man, what do you want?" He replies, "I'm hungry, venerable sirs." So the hell wardens pry open his mouth with red-hot iron tongs, burning, blazing, and glowing, and throw into it a copper ball, burning, blazing, and glowing. Then the hell wardens say to him, "Well, my good man, what do you want?" He replies, "I'm thirsty, venerable sirs." So the hell wardens pry open his mouth with red-hot iron tongs, burning and blazing and glowing, and pour into it molten copper, burning, blazing, and glowing. There he feels painful, racking, piercing feelings, yet he does not die as long as his evil karma is not exhausted. Then the hell wardens throw him back into the great hell once more. I tell you this, monks, not from having heard it from another contemplative or Brahmin, On the contrary, I tell you this just as I have known for myself, seen for myself, penetrated for myself. And that comes from MN 130. Wow. So I actually dropped this episode a while ago, and then I posted it on YouTube and realized that I had forgotten to edit half of it somehow. And I'm so glad that I caught that, because my original comments on this sutta were totally incorrect. And it's funny because, when I went back to look at this again and, listen to it and make the changes where I needed to, I had a weird feeling like, Sarah, I think you need to double check that. And so I used Norbu again. And, a hodgepodge of trusted resources for early Buddhist teachings. And yeah, the Buddha said, this is a place we go, man. Heaven and hell. Just like the Christians say, just like the Catholics say, just like probably other religions say. I'm so ignorant. My apologies. That's why I just try to stay away from talking about that which I don't understand, which is why you hear me talk all the time about how I don't know what I'm doing here with Buddhism. As I limp along, I had a really robust conversation with Norbu, which is why I donate to Norbu, because, I realize that it requires a lot of resources to run AI. AI is very expensive. It's environmentally expensive. It's, anyway, that's another conversation. But yeah, I had a good kind of clarification with Norbu about this, and I find it really, really interesting, and it got me to really thinking a lot about, the religious, the Judeo-Christian people that I know. I grew up with a Jewish stepfather, and I have a lot of very devout Christians in my family, who, do a lot of good work in the community that comes from, their faith, their commitment to their faith. And I've always wondered about this idea of heaven and hell as a proper atheist / secularist / skeptic / we can't know until we know kind of worldview kind of gal. And I still feel that way, even though I've been corrected, and I'm grateful. And if you did happen to catch this before I fixed it, my apologies for getting it wrong, and I'm glad I caught it. But yeah, so this is this sutta is not a metaphor, as I had believed. Where I was correct in my teaching of Buddhism many moons ago, is, now that I think about it, is the same stuff that was difficult for me to contend with back in my early days of Buddhism. I don't leave it because I chose it, but man, I love to push back on it, because if it doesn't make sense, I will. And for me, subjectively, going back to the original Buddhist premise of the fabricated state, if by that argument we are nothing more than fabrication, and if, as the early Theravāda, canon teachings suggest, the vision and the sights and the sounds and the smells that Buddha claimed to have seen when he was in deep jhanic states and was, becoming, quote unquote, enlightened. And I put it in quotes because not everybody is a really big fan of the idea that, you can even become enlightened. So I'm trying to bring in a little bit of pluralism here. But, that was the idea with Buddha, right? Is that he transcended all views. And again, this is where I'm just so ignorant that I just want to leave it alone. where did our conversation go? Well, maybe I'll talk about that. So I got to talking to Norbu about this, right? This is, even Norbu said, yeah, this gets to the real tricky stuff. So even I'm grateful that AI at least, confirmed that what I'm trying to understand here is really, really complex in Buddhism. If it's all fabrication, then anything that you see in meditation is also fabrication, and therefore is not subjectively, or rather is not, cannot be a truth claim, based on your own argument of fabrication. And so this was kind of the tenor, basically, of my conversation with Norbu, is that you can't have both things be true. But Norbu explained to me that in early Buddhist teachings, when you refer to the canon and you look at the way that, after Siddhartha Gautama, became Lord Buddha, and started going around and teaching, what he was saying was that even this idea here of karma is, a tool, a teaching tool, and that all tools are really rafts that help you to get from one side of the shore to the other. But that in itself is a trap. That's the Zen argument, right? But then see, I think Zen in and of itself kind of violates early Buddhist view. Why did you need to split off? If you're not attached to your views, then why did you need to split off? So, it's just this weird kind of constant paradox and contradiction. But again, all I can say is, do I believe in a heaven or hell? No. I don't believe in anything that I can't see. Do I believe that anything is possible? As I've said before, I have experienced things that I cannot explain. That's all I can say about that. That is the very definition of beginner's mind, I might add. Really, quite frankly, if somebody, this to me should be a koan. Here it is. What's beginner's mind? Answer. You know what I mean? It's like we don't know. You don't know. And even if Lord Buddha saw it in profound meditation, he also doesn't know for a fact that that's how it actually works. That was his own fabricated experience of meditation. I too, tripping on drugs and in meditation. I don't do drugs anymore like that. But I'm just saying, as I've said earlier, back in my youth, did a lot of acid, did a lot of mushrooms, a lot of hallucinogens. I experienced profound things. Yeah, there's plenty going on that I don't understand. But so maybe I kind of understand a little bit why he was so dicey in his teachings, because he himself understood that his own claims were BS, that he himself is privy to his own fabricated state. I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know. Some people say he didn't even exist. What do I know? But I am glad that this got messed up so that I had to go back and correct my error. Buddha's claim for heaven and hell is an actual place that we might go to based on our karma. I'll believe that when I see it. But for now, I'm here on planet Earth, and I'm in this human body, and I have already talked ad nauseum about why the psychological aspects of Buddhism make sense to me. I'll not leave this. This is the cosmology of Buddhism. He had an experience. I've also had experiences. Wow, I'm happy to report that I have never had a trip like that. That's terrifying to see hell. Because when you are in deep meditation, and I've only had this happen for me once in deep meditation, it's quite sensate. It's quite auditory, sensory. It's smells, tastes, sounds, sights. It's very three-dimensional, but it's all happening in the mind. It's all happening in meditation. Now, granted, understand how I'm using mind here, right? Mind doesn't mean what it means in Buddhism that it means in the way, mind is more than just cognition, it's, anyway, blah, blah, blah. So this is getting long, but I'm just going to say that, yeah, I am going to leave it here, but that was just powerful, intense, and it sounds like what the Buddha saw in deep, deep, deep meditative states was terrifying. I have had one terrifying experience on mushrooms that was absolutely terrifying. All of this is available to us all the time. Again, because it's phenomena arising, so it's available to us all of the time. I think this is why it's really, really probably pretty dangerous. Hallucinogen, I've talked about hallucinogenics before, and they've been studied by science for many, many years, well over, they're, I realize a lot of people don't take them seriously, but, they're certainly taken seriously more and more in the sciences. And they're certainly taken quite seriously in wisdom traditions around the world. And then, of course, there are some wisdom traditions like Buddhism that would say, do not consume intoxicants. And for me personally, that's what I aspire to, but that's my, that's just a choice that I've made. I'm not putting it on you. It's not for me to tell you what to do. And there's certainly a lot of science to support that taking hallucinogens can show you a glimpse of some of these ideas here. Anyway, I'm going to go. If you're listening, thank you so much for listening. And I'll be back again when I have some time. Trying to finish this doctorate, darn it, to drop another episode. And take good care of yourself. Be well.